Welcome to our Bushuddle podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Cuthbert, Creative Director at Baker Creative. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please hit subscribe so you can get notified when new content comes out. Please share this with anyone who could be inspired by it. Hi, Tom. Thanks so much for joining us on our podcast. We really appreciate it.
Sure. So happy to be with you today.
Tell our viewers what you exactly do at the zoo.
So my title is I'm the president and CEO of the Columbus Zoo in the Wilds, and that also includes Zambezi Bay Water Park and our Safari Golf Club. So I'm the chief executive officer for the enterprises, those four different entities, developing our strategy, our vision, and just making sure that we can be the best we can be every day.
What attracted you to the zoo in the first place?
So this is the first zoo that I've ever worked for. And so my history has largely been with aquariums, with science centers, with aquatic theme parks. I trained as a marine biologist, and that really was my background. So, but when I got a call a little over 3 years ago about the Columbus Zoo, it was certainly an intriguing opportunity. And I felt like I had done pretty much everything I wanted to do in Texas at the Texas State Aquarium, and was ready for one more big challenge. And this certainly was a big challenge. But I've known about the Columbus Zoo for most of my career, because I've been associated a lot with our national association, the AZA, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. I served on the board for 8 years and actually chaired one for 1 year. So I always knew a lot about the Columbus Zoo, but I certainly never anticipated that I would be working here or leading it.
And was there anything surprising when you took the role over?
I knew the Columbus Zoo was very well regarded institution nationally and I assume locally. But as I started meeting a lot of people in the community leaders, elected officials, just lots and lots of stakeholders, I realized how important Columbus Zoo was to the Columbus region and how beloved it was, and you know how impactful it has been in this community for nearly 100 years.
How has the Secrets of the Zoo show impacted your role?
I think it's certainly impacted the zoo and it's grown our national brand. So Columbus Zoo is always been a fairly well-known institution, and I give Jack Hanna a lot of credit for that. Obviously, he really developed an unbelievable connection with people all over the world with his hands-on approach to conservation and engagement. And so that certainly helped build the national brand of the Columbus Zoo. But I think the Secrets of the Zoo went far beyond that, because that featured so many of our staff. I think about Priya, one of our veterinarians, or Dr. Jan Raymer, who previously ran our Wilds Conservation Facility. To this day, when Jan or Priya or any of our other staff are walking through the zoo, guests will stop them and ask them a question or want to take a picture. So they've become now the celebrities. And in many cases, they've actually become the new Jack Hannas of our age. And so that's been pretty remarkable. I think it's provided a strong platform for me coming in as a CEO, knowing that we've got this national brand, and really how do we leverage that to really become a more impactful wildlife conservation organization.
Why do you think conservation is so important?
In my view, it's really our moral license to operate. We care for animals here. We care for thousands of animals here and at the Wilds. But we care for them for specific reasons. Certainly, the zoo is an entertaining place to come with your family and have a great experience. People learn about animals. The education impact that we have is profound. But that's not enough. I mean, ultimately, if we're stewards of these animals, if we're allowed to care for these animals, then we have to make sure that we're doing everything we can to protect their conspecifics in the wild. So the animals at the zoo, even though it sounds a bit trite, I do feel like they're ambassadors for wild species. And so we have 7 Asian elephants here, but we just launched in Assam, India, the first IUCN Center for Species Survival for Asian elephants in country. No other zoo in the world has ever done this, ever created a conservation species survival center in country, working with all the different range countries where Asian elephants live. So by visiting the zoo and seeing our elephants here, buying a ticket, helping support our conservation work. Our guests are helping support Asian elephant conservation in India and around the world.
That's pretty cool.
And that's really that to me is the purpose of the Columbus Zoo. It's the purpose of any modern zoological enterprise anywhere in the world. There has to be a wildlife conservation component to what they do. Otherwise, they shouldn't be in this business.
Now, how does that extend to the wilds?
So the wilds is a great example of sort of conservation in action. So we have assurance populations of species like the scimitar horned oryx, who up until recently were extinct in the wild, but by reintroduction programs that the wilds and the zoo and other zoos around the country have developed, we're now putting scimitar horned oryx back in Chad and back in their native habitats. So things like the cheetah reproduction program that we have at the wild, so we can actually help boost cheetah populations of other zoos around the country. Our white rhino program, we now have 7 generations of white rhino that we're breeding at the wilds, and what we learn from that we can apply to our field work. In addition, the restoration ecology work, the history of the wilds is fascinating. So it was an area that was surface mined by AEP. AEP finished production. They put topsoil down, sculpted the land, and then essentially wanted to come up with a good, positive purpose for that land. And so that's how the Columbus Zoo ended up acquiring that. And so now we can study how prairie restoration occurs in the wild after some traumatic development. It could be a wildfire, it could be mining, or it could be some other force that has impacted that wild population. We can understand now how to restore that habitat. So that's part of the ongoing research that we do at the wilds. So the wilds is very much focused on wildlife conservation work.
Can you speak to how the zoo is offering defining moments to special audiences?
There's so many different ways that folks can have an amazing, engaging experience at the zoo. So in all the different areas, we have lots of opportunities to engage with our animals, and we have one of the best docent programs, I think, of any zoo in the country. And so on any given day, our guests not only have a chance to see these amazing animals, but they hear stories directly from our docents about these animals. But we also have special encounters where folks can actually have a one-on-one experience helping bathe an Asian elephant, or even having a close encounter with a red panda. So lots of opportunities for folks to get really engaged with our animals.
My daughter has been to the zoo camp several times, and what she learned at the zoo, it would be hard for me to teach her, be gentle, how to appreciate the animals. What does that mean? She's very little, but if you don't do them when they're young, sometimes you miss that window of opportunity.
Yeah. Well, and that's actually a key part of our wildlife conservation efforts, is that we need to make sure that we can help facilitate human and animal coexistence. And so one of the biggest challenges, for example, with Asian elephants that we talked about earlier, is that, what happens when an Asian elephant walks through a village and does damage to a crop that may be a subsistence crop for the family that lives there. So part of our conservation efforts are working very closely with indigenous populations to try to see if we can mitigate that damage and try to help them determine a way that they can live peacefully with these animals. So that's a critical part of this empathy that we try to instill, not just in our conservation work, but to all the visitors that come to the zoo and all the kids that come in our zoo camps.
So what is the RISE scholarship, and what does that mean for future generations?
Yeah, so the RISE Scholarship is a program that we just launched, and as you can imagine, with the popularity of the Columbus Zoo, we would get lots of requests for interns. And so in the past, those were unpaid internships. So these were kids that just, they didn't get paid, but they got to come to the zoo and do some really meaningful work study experience. But because they were unpaid, it would typically came from kids that came from families that had some means, that were either middle or upper income. And as you can imagine, there were lots of kids that couldn't participate in that, kids that had to have a job, that had to earn money for themselves and their families. So the RISE Scholarship Program is our first paid internship program. And so we have 20 essentially scholarships that we award each year to kids that come typically from pretty diverse families, and they have an opportunity now to actually come, intern, learn about a career, but also earn some money at the same time.
As we understand that the zoo is constantly changing and new exhibits and new things, what does the future look like for the zoo?
Yeah, so we've got a really exciting future ahead. So I'll touch on a couple of projects. So about 6 months ago, well, about a year ago, we worked on a major project to dramatically increase and expand our indoor bonobo habitat. So you asked me earlier about things that were surprising. So the Columbus Zoo has always done a really amazing job at creating habitats for animals such as the Heart of Africa savanna or our polar bear exhibit. We didn't always put quite as much focus on where the animals spent the winter months, and so we're starting to do that now. So the space where the bonobos spend the winter time is going to double in size, have a much higher ceiling, organic flooring, a much better, much more enriching space for those animals. So that project is going to come online this summer. We're excited about that. An even larger project is North America Trek. So our North America region, one of our largest regions and one of our oldest regions of the zoo, really needed to be updated. So we broke ground last fall on phase one. So this is about a $40 million project. It's going to develop completely new habitats for our Mexican gray wolf, for our trumpeter swan, for our bald eagle, our river otters, our black bear. They will have brand new exhibits. There'll be brand new experiences for our guests. There'll be also a new restaurant in this location. And we're creating what we're calling the Ohio Center for Wildlife Conservation. So this is a facility that that visitors will be able to walk into and see some of the conservation work that we do right here in Central Ohio. So we do conservation work all over the world, but we're very proud of what we do locally, working with partners like the Ohio Department of Natural Resources and Ohio State University. We work on rearing and releasing hellbenders back into streams and rivers in Ohio, burying beetles, Massasauga snakes. There are a number of really important projects that we work on here locally, and we're going to feature all of those in the new center.
What can regular people do at home or in their neighborhood to continue conservation?
Yeah, so I think we've got a whole series of information that our conservation education folks develop about how to make your backyard more bird friendly, for example. What are some of the things that you can do with your turf? So there's lots of opportunities, but I think most of all, we just want folks to learn more, be engaged, understand what's some of the wildlife that we have here in Central Ohio, and what can we do to protect those species. So those are things that they can learn actually in the North America region. So it's really a combination of just learning, understanding what's important. Certainly visiting our website, folks can learn a lot more, but I think the most effective way is just to come to the zoo, because then they can learn, and like you mentioned, getting the kids really to understand and appreciate the importance of animals and nature and why we need to preserve them.
So what's the biggest misperception that you think people have about zoos in general?
There's probably several. I think one probably is that folks love to come to zoos, but they think they're largely for entertainment. They think that we just go out. So there's two things, that, and they think that we go out and collect these animals from the wild. So virtually all of our birds, of our mammals, our reptiles were either born at our zoo or born at another zoo. And so, for example, our Asian elephants are part of a much larger family of Asian elephants that live in about 15 or 20 zoos all around North America. And we monitor their genetics. Sometimes we even move animals around. In fact, we have a bull elephant at Columbus Zoo now that came from the Cincinnati Zoo a couple of years ago. And the goal is for that animal to mate with some of our animals here. They'll produce more offspring, and then those offspring may go to another zoo. So that we collectively manage our animals, and that they have been born in a zoo and not collected from the wild is an important one. But I think even more so than that, what we talked about before, that the reason we have the zoo here is to help save animals in the wild. So the wildlife conservation work of zoos, in many cases, is overshadowed a little bit about just the entertainment that people see in zoos.
Understood. What do you think would surprise people the most about the Columbus Zoo?
Oh, wow. I think maybe the size of our zoo, how many staff that we have, over 400 full-time people and 1,000 part-time people. Maybe that our collective budget is over $100 million a year. So we're a really large organization. And I think that probably the breadth and depth of our conservation work all over the world.
And how can the public better support the zoo?
Well, certainly just by coming to visit. That's the single easiest thing that folks can do, become a member. And if folks want to do even more, we've got lots of different programs through our philanthropy department where folks can become much more involved at a higher level. Lots of different opportunities to donate to specific programs to help support our growth, our conservation work, and just become ambassadors for us.
Yeah. So I myself have traveled to all kinds of different zoos all around the globe, and I always people are very familiar with this zoo.
Yeah.
And what kind of trends do you see happening in the zoo space?
Well, I think, some of the things that we're doing and that you're seeing more and more at zoos, in all likelihood, our zoo is going to continue to grow, but 5 or 10 years from now, we may have less animals then than we have today. And that doesn't always make sense. But for example, in our new master plan, we've got designs on doubling our space for our Asian elephant. So right now they have, I think, 2.5 acres. That's going to go to more than 5 acres. So having larger spaces for the animals, better spaces to ensure their well-being. So not just their care and their health, but their well-being. We want to, at the end of the day, we want to make sure not only are animals healthy, but they're also happy. And so we have ways to measure the well-being of these animals. So a big focus on that, designing habitats that that truly meet all their needs so they can exhibit all the natural behaviors that you would expect to see. Probably much larger habitats and certainly habitats, for example, in this part of the country that are more suitable year round. So making sure that where the animals are in the winter is just as good as where they are in the summer. And that's actually great for our guests too, because our attendance right now is very seasonal. With the exception of our wildlife program, most folks come to the zoo in the summer because, again, it's cold in the winter. Many of the animals are in the barns where you can't see them. So as we develop new habitats and we expand those barns and we allow the public into them, that's a better space for the animals and a more opportunity for our guests to see animals year round. And those, I think, are all trends that other zoos are experiencing.
So leading a large organization as you do, what mistakes do you see other leaders make?
That's a good question. If I think about the Columbus Zoo, it's always important, as a CEO, you're busy, you have a lot of meetings. I mean, there's some days when I have 7, 8, 9 meetings a day. But I always try to make sure I take time to walk the zoo every day. And I do that for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think it's a stress reliever for me. It helps me, get away from my computer for even 20 or 30 minutes. But I have a chance to interact with guests. I get to see what's happening on the ground. I get a chance to talk to one of our grounds folks and maybe find out they're not having the best day because a piece of equipment failed or something like that. So I can help, find a resource and sometimes mitigate some layers of bureaucracy. So I also get the chance to talk to our docents and I talk to our guests. So I actually have an opportunity to see how our product is being perceived every day. And I think if a leader of an organization can't do that, whether they run a warehouse or a bank or an engineering firm, if they don't have an opportunity to see their customers, to talk to their customers on a regular basis, to talk to people who they interact with, I think that's a real lost opportunity.
I thought I heard earlier that you said you used to be a marine biologist.
Yeah. Well, I guess technically I still am, but I don't use it much anymore.
So what made you decide to get into that field?
Yeah, so I grew up in Florida and spent a lot of time in the water, under the water, fishing, diving. As you can imagine, just really immersed in a marine environment. So when I went to college and I went to graduate school, that's what I wanted to study, and I wasn't sure exactly what I would do. My thought was that I was always fascinated with sharks, and my thought was I would become a marine biologist and study sharks and be a professor somewhere. And as I was finishing up my graduate work, I got a call from one of the curators at SeaWorld in Orlando, and they were looking for someone to help manage their shark collection. And so I thought, well, this would be kind of interesting to do for a few years. So I would do this after I finished up my master's. I was going to get a PhD, and I thought this would be a sort of a fun thing to do for a few years. I ended up staying there for about 6 years, and at that point decided that my career, I would probably have a more fulfilling career if I pursued that rather than higher ed. So I finished my work up at SeaWorld and then took a job at the National Maritime Center as a curator, helped open that new aquarium and science center, and then was recruited to go to Texas to be the director of animal husbandry I then became the chief operating officer, and then I was the CEO for about 20 years there.
So when it's all said and done, what kind of legacy would you like to have?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I just want to feel like I made a difference in each place that I worked, and I think that I have. I certainly, I mean, if I look at the trajectory of the Texas State Aquarium, when I arrived, it was one of the smallest aquariums in the country, and now it's the seventh largest aquarium in North America. So we certainly had an opportunity to grow and expand that program, become a much more impactful marine conservation institution. So I'm certainly proud of our team and all that we were able to accomplish together. And I think the same for the zoo. We're sort of in a new era now. I sort of look at the history of our institution at nearly 100 years. For the first 50 years, we were essentially a small municipally run zoo, part of the Parks and Rec Department on the west side of Riverside, maybe 40 or 50 acres. That was the first 50 years. That was Columbus Zoo 1.0. And then Mel Dodge hired Jack Hanna, this young man named Jack Hanna, to join the team in the late 70s. And that really began a period of enormous transformation. And along with Jerry Boren, who came in later and was his partner in the middle 90s, they grew the zoo, they expanded it, they purchased more land, they created bigger habitats, better habitats for the animals, and along the way, created a national brand out of the Columbus Zoo. And that really, up until Jack retired in 2020, I sort of view that as Columbus Zoo 2.0. And so now we're here at the brink of our centennial. So in 3 years, 4 years from now, we'll be 100 years old. This is the first time that Jack Hanna has not been directly involved in the zoo. So we're shaping our future. So what we're creating now essentially is Columbus Zoo 3.0.
That sounds pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Sure, you bet.
If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please hit subscribe so you can get notified when new content comes out. Please share this with anyone who could be inspired by it, and feel free to post any questions so we can be inspired by new content. Thanks for listening. If you're interested in learning more, visit our website at bakercreative.co.